Radio Cayman's Historical Vignettes was brought to you by Rotary Central. For more than 110 years, Rotary members have used their passion, energy, and intelligence to take action on sustainable projects.
Live from Radio Cayman Studio, this is
Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community.
A very good morning and warm welcome to Money Sense. I'm Simon Caudry and I have the pleasure of hosting this morning's show and welcoming Georgie Loxton once again to the studio. Good morning and welcome back, Georgie.
Good morning, Simon. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes.
I know neither of us are
Thanksgiving.
American, but
Yes.
it's a really big day for Americans.
Yes. There's a joke in there, isn't it, about how they give thanks to the British for and all that, but that's too soon, is it? No. Now, Georgie, you are known to our listeners, but not for a little while. I was doing my research. You haven't been joining us for over a year, I think it is.
No, are you serious?
I think so.
As time flies.
So we have a lot of conversation to catch up on because we've had some strangeness in the markets. We've had some peculiarity. We've had elections. We've had volatility. We've had markets going up. We've had markets going down. We've had weird things happening. So perhaps I'll start the conversation with, what's your view on what's going on and why is it going on? What when people look at markets, they think of equity markets, obviously. What's your take on what's happening right now?
Well, that's so interesting what you just said, Simon, because you said there are weird things going on. And
In the world, I meant.
Yes, in the world there are. But actually, markets do what markets always do, which is mostly they go up and sometimes they go down. So I would say in terms of weird things in the market is doing what the market always does. And this year, as I said, mostly it's gone up, but we had a blip. Actually, we had a full-blown bear market, which is defined by a 20% or more fall back in February and March of this year.
Right at the beginning of the year, yeah.
Right at the beginning of the year. It didn't last very long. It was very like the COVID crash. The market went down in response to Trump and his tariffs, and it went down very fast over a period of about 6 weeks. And then, lo and behold, the recovery was about as fast as the fall. And what's really interesting when you look at markets is very often the recovery is a mirror of the crash. If you have a very fast crash, you often have a very fast recovery. And that's exactly what happened. And the markets quickly went on to make new highs. And we're pretty much at an all-time high today. We had a bit of a wobble off the top. I think the market fell about 5 or 6% from its peak, a few weeks back?
Yeah.
But again, that's really normal. We have to expect that the market's going to fall 5 or 6% fairly regularly. And we also have to expect that it's going to fall 20% fairly regularly.
In a sense, though, perhaps what's so surprising is how infrequent some of the larger falls are, because you say fairly regularly. Those are your words. I think that they're good words to use, but it's actually not fairly regularly that the market has been going down substantially. It's been quite a long time since it's had that sort of prolonged bear market.
Prolonged, if you're talking about sort of a financial crisis style crash. But that was unusual when you look at history. I mean, if we look at the last...
we had the 2000s, then we had the financial crisis.
Yes.
So we had sort of like three fairly close together, didn't we?
In that decade.
Yeah.
If you look at the 2000 to 2010 decade, it started with the dot-com bubble bursting, and that was quickly followed by the Twin Towers. And also during that period, we had Enron, the Enron scandal, which was an enormous event in financial markets because it completely shook all confidence in any companies and their reporting. So from that 2000 to 2002 period, we had a 50-something% fall. The market more than halved. And then it recovered, and then we had the financial crisis. Not very many years later, 2007 to 2009, we had another halving. So the 2000 to 2010 period in the US market was really, really hard. 2 50% falls, right? And for those of you investing during that period, you might remember the pain, but that is psychologically, financially really, really hard. And I think that period has had a massive impact on what's happened since and the psyche of investors since, because since the bottom in 2009, the S&P 500, which is what we kind of think about as the broad US market, it's the 500 biggest companies in the US, not the world, just the US. It bottomed in March 2009 at about 670. We are up 10 times since then. The market today stands at 6,800. Okay, so we've gone from a low of roughly 700 to a high of roughly 7,000 since that bottom. And we have had crashes since. If we even just go back to the last 5 years, we had the COVID crash, which was a 34-ish% fall in 2020. Then we had a 2022 crash. 2022 was a horrible year, Simon. You remember?
Yeah.
I think it was the 5th worst year on record. The market just slowly fell all the way through 2022. And then we had another one this year. So we actually have had quite a few crashes. But as you say, they've been quite short. The market has recovered quite quickly. But again, when you look back over history, the market does tend to recover quite quickly. It was those two massive crises in 2000 and 2007 that were really sort of different from all the rest, I think.
I wonder, you have a number of clients that you deal with, and they're of different ages, different lifestyles, different backgrounds, different upbringings, and different nationalities. And how much do you think the period over which you sort of began your career, your formative years, so someone who went into industry or went into a job during and started earning money in 98, 99, started deploying some money, saving some money then, and then saw these crashes, how much do you think that sort of affects one's behavior or attitude to markets versus someone who is only started investing, say 2002, at the bottom, and then saw rapid
They've
rise?
just seen the market go up,
yeah.
really. Huge. I mean, massive. Psychology is everything in investing. You know, it's Warren Buffett who famously said, it's not IQ, it's EQ, right? It is really how we behave that matters as investors, really so much more than what we know. You know, good investing is psychological rather than intelligence, really.
Yeah.
So go on.
No, I wanted to go because you mentioned EQ, IQ, and then there's intelligence, and then it leads to a sort of segues ever so slightly to artificial intelligence, because the market today there's a lot of public press. You can't watch any TV show about markets without seeing someone talking about NVIDIA, without someone talking about what are referred to as this Magnificent Seven, the Mag 7. And it is fair to say that a huge proportion of the market's gains have been concentrated in a very small number of companies. So the breadth of market changes has not been as wide as historically it has been. And so for a lot of people, markets movement doesn't feel real, or it doesn't feel as though it's impacted them in quite the same way, because their company that they work for, or the company that they own, or the company that they invested haven't done so well. So you've kind of had to have invested in 6 or 7 different companies in order to have felt this market movement. And does that not sort of strike you as, in a sense, slightly unnerving? Because how can the economy and in aggregate be doing well if it's really down to only 6 or 7 companies?
You're right, but also the market has also been driven historically since the 1920s by a small number of stocks that have done really, really well. If you look back through history, the market does not go up because most stocks go up. The market goes up because a small number of stocks do really, really well. And what I would say to that is it's true, but that's what's so powerful about an indexing approach, because what we can't know from now for the next 10 years is which stocks are going to be the ones that are going to drive the market. Nobody knows that. Nobody does. Nobody really knew what stocks it was going to be over the last 10 years. And, my guess is it's probably not going to be the stocks that have driven the market over the last 10 years that drive it over the next 10 years, because the world is really rapidly changing.
It's an interesting one, because when you think about technology, you can go back to who are the pioneers in technology. You have Microsoft is still a pioneer, but you have the Oracles, the Microsofts, and Intels. And Intel's now a government-owned company.
Yeah.
Bizarre situation. Yeah. But there are many companies that were the pioneers back in the first technology renaissance, so to speak, which are no longer either existing or are shadows of their former selves.
Think about Nokia or BlackBerry or,
You've just upset every Canadian who listens to the show by talking
Are
about BlackBerry.
we still going to be carrying an iPhone around in our pockets in 10 years? Maybe. Yeah. But will it be some completely different technology that has displaced Apple? Quite possibly. So going back to that kind of method of investing that I just referenced called indexing, there was a very famous investor who said, we don't want to just try and pick the needle in the haystack. We want to try and own the whole haystack. And the problem with trying to know which companies are going to drive the market over the next 10 years is that you're really trying to find that needle in the haystack. And you actually don't have to as an investor, because you can just say, I'm going to own that whole haystack. And within that haystack, I know the needle's there. I know those stocks, those companies, those incredible NVIDIAs of the next 10 years are in there somewhere. But I'm going to admit to myself, because of my humility as an investor, that I don't know which ones they're going to be. But if I buy all 500 of those great companies in the US, plus some other stuff, because we don't just want to be in the US and we don't just want to be in big US companies, I know that the needle's in there. And I can just kind of sit back and say, as an investor, it's okay. I'm going to get my fair share of market returns. And if you've done that over the last 20 years, you've done really, really, really well. If you tried to pick individual stocks, you might have got lucky. You might have got lucky and owned those ones that have done incredibly well. And there's a danger in that as an investor, right? Because it's very hard to look at how you've done as an investor and put it down to luck. You always tend to put it down to skill, and you think you're a genius, and then that goes
bad
to that
things
phrase
are luck, bad luck, and good things are skill, right?
Exactly. And, the rising tide lifts all boats. Yeah. So if the market has gone up 20% almost this year, most people should have made a lot of money this year, right? And is it skill or is it luck? Difficult to disentangle the two.
So one of the topics that often comes up in market conversations at the moment are valuations being very rich, and I want to go back again to the concentration of gains in these stocks. And I take your point that this is because of a thematic event that's happening in our lives right now. Hence, those stocks are driving the markets. Whereas in the past, there were thematic events associated with the introduction of phones, hence BlackBerry, etc. But one of the things that, and perhaps slightly controversial for someone in your shoes who's a fan of indexing, and I totally understand why, but there is an argument or potential argument which says if most people are indexing, you've got all these index investors who are contributing money. The index investing companies then go and buy exactly the same companies that are already higher in weight. So does it create the conditions theoretically whereby bubbles could be propagated for perhaps longer, because the indexes have no choice. They have to buy Nvidia in the highest possible weight. They have to buy
because
Microsoft.
It now accounts for whatever.
Yeah, and they have no choice. So it's not as though you're going to Georgie, who, let's say there's an equivalent of you who isn't an indexer and says, well, I'm not going to buy Nvidia. Or even if you took that view, it's a very dangerous view because you're suddenly so different to where the market's behaving.
Totally. And Nvidia is an extraordinary company, right? I mean, again, you sort of talk about bubbles, and if we look at these companies today that have driven the market, they are very, very different companies to, say, the companies that existed back in the bubble of 1999 and 2000. Those companies kind of they weren't really real businesses, right? Often they didn't actually have any revenue. They definitely didn't have any profits, and they were ideas based on .com, pets.com and, all of those companies that they were inflated purely because they had .com in the name. Now, the companies today, the big tech companies, are certainly richly valued. We can't claim otherwise, but they are real incredible businesses with incredibly growing profits. We've never seen companies like this in the history of the world.
Now, you brought it up, so I'm going to bring this back, not to haunt you, but just to reference the conversation. You brought up Enron, and one of the things you mentioned quite reasonably is that Enron led to an element of distrust in markets. And there have been a couple of instances in the past 2 or 3 months whereby you've seen the likes of Nvidia or others buying shares in companies that are buyers of their own products. So some of the AI development companies have invested money to say, now there's a perfectly valid reason for that, which is they are going to be potentially big companies themselves. They need to buy all these chips in order to become good companies. But there is an argument. There is a germination of an argument, which is actually there's a bit of what one might call self-dealing, whereby you're investing in a company, it then buys your own product. And in the past, if that had happened to an Enron type thing, people would have said, well, that's a bit fishy. You're actually accounting for profits by selling them to a company you own. So,
that people are starting to talk about that.
Yes, exactly. So
yeah.
does that worry you in any sense?
Does that worry me? An individual company or a few individual companies? Not really, actually, Simon. Again, because so long as you are diversified, like really
as an investor, you mean?
As an investor, right? And sure, if you just own the big tech AI companies, that really should concern you. Because you're not diversified. But if you own those as part of a globally diversified portfolio that has companies across all sectors and all sizes and all countries, there's always going to be companies in there that are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, like Enron was. And if you only owned Enron, you were in big trouble. But if back then you were globally diversified, you did fine. Even in that 2000 to 2010 period where the US market didn't do well at all, if you'd only owned US stocks, you had a really bad decade. But if you owned global stocks, you did pretty well because Europe did really well during that period and emerging markets did really well during that period. So again, I would say, diversification kind of protects you from those kind of things, those individual systemic risks that can happen when you aren't diversified.
Well, let me pretend I'm a person who you've never met before. I come to you as an advisor and I say to you, you tell me these theories, and I go, well, okay, I haven't got a financial background, which a lot of people might think is probably true in a sense. No, I come to you and I say, this all investing, this whole diversification, but if I just bought the Mag 7, I'd be super wealthy. What, isn't that quite a difficult proposition to overcome when someone says that to you?
It is really it's really difficult, and I would say that diversified investors have great lives. Non-diversified investors might have great years, right? And what are we trying to do here? We're trying to make sure you have a great life. And if you're not diversified, you can have periods where you do really, really well, right? So if you've only owned the Mag 7 really for the last 10 years, you've obviously outperformed everybody else. But you have no idea whether that's going to continue. And there's a really big difference between getting rich and staying rich. Those two things require different skills. So if someone has got rich by owning only those stocks, they then need to think about how they're going to stay rich or stay wealthy for the rest of their life. And that's why diversification just has to come into it. It just has to. It's like the only free lunch in investing, right, is to be diversified. It's so fundamental to the long-term principles of being a disciplined, patient investor.
How difficult then is it to argue against the proposition when someone says, I've made 20% this year, I may have made 10% last year, or I've made huge gains. Why don't I take my chips off the table?
Yeah, that's a really hard one. That's a really hard one too. As soon as you take your chips off the table, what do? We stop.
I guess you don't spend them, but that's a different proposition, isn't it?
And of course we take chips off the table when we need the money to live on, right? I would say that, if you're at retirement or you're retired, then you need an income and therefore you have to take chips off the table because that's presumably where your income's coming from.
There's no point dying with $5 million in your bank account, is there?
But as soon as you take it out, what you're kind of saying is, I think this is the market high and the market's never going to go higher.
Yeah.
Well, we've never seen that ever in history before, right? Because the market always turns around and goes back up again. Okay. And as soon as you take the chips off the table, you stop that power of compounding. And that power of compounding is like the snowball rolling down the hill, and it's starting really small and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's this power of like the returns on top of the returns on top of the returns on top of the returns. What you've done by taking the money out is that you've turned compound interest effectively into simple interest. And you can't get wealthy on simple interest. You can only get wealthy on compound interest, which is this making money on your money. And then that just goes on and on and on.
And presumably then people say, but I think the market's going down.
I think the market's going down.
So therefore I need to.
Yeah.
So, how do you respond to that? Because I guess it's almost partly human nature, isn't it, to say, I'm scared. I'm terrified. I keep on hearing about valuations being expensive. I keep on hearing about the bubble.
Yeah.
I keep on hearing even some executives fretting about. But I hear Jamie Dimon talking about there is this bubble or that bubble. Or surely they must know better. Therefore, I need to take half my money. Or I need to be out of the market for 6 months.
Human nature is a terrible investor, Simon. Human nature is the one thing as investors that we have to overcome.
Yeah, but you have to deal with humans. That's the problem,
I do have to deal with human nature all the time. So yes, the impulse, because it's an impulse, and we never want to act as investors on an impulse. The impulse to want to get out at the bottom, right, which is this, I have to get out before the market goes down anymore, which tends to happen right about before the market turns around and comes back up again. That impulse is as dangerous as the impulse that we're seeing now, which is this impulse of I've got to get out because the market's gone up too much. There's an old phrase that if you think the market's high today, wait till you see it in 20 years, right? There's never been a period where you could have come out of the market and 5 years later, really, you said, yeah, that was the right thing to do. And it's so dangerous because if you come out before you need the money to live on, right, i.e. you've got to get back in again. To be correct, you have to get two things right. You have to get out at the right time and you have to get back in at the right time. Okay? You might get lucky and get out at the right time. Like today might be the high and the market might go down 20% from here and you say, I was right. But are you going to get back in somewhere near the bottom? Almost certainly not, because getting back in is, again, psychologically so hard, because if the market does go down 20%, something's going on in the world, right? Something bad is going on in the world. We've had another crisis.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh.
right? Look back at, what drives the market to go down. It'll be, back in February, it was the tariffs, right, which were going to destroy the entire economic world order as we have known it for the last 100 years, but it kind of sort of hasn't, which is why the market's turned around and gone back up again. So the market goes down. The chances of you getting back in at the bottom are really, really slim, because you'll just say, oh, hold on, I'll wait a bit longer. And you'll wait too long, and the market will have turned around and it'll come back up again, and it'll be somewhere back near where you got in, right? You'll have missed it. And then you're sitting on this cash balance saying, oof, what do I do now, right? Market went down, it's come back up again. Now I'm going to wait for the next crash, because I can't get back in higher than I got out, right? And you start playing this psychological warfare with yourself, and the cash is on the sidelines. The market just keeps going up because that's mostly what the market does. And you never get back in. And that is really dangerous. So I just say to people, look, the market will go down. It goes down regularly, as we've just said, but it goes up more than it goes down. And it never permanently goes down. In order to earn the incredible long-term permanent returns that are offered to you from owning businesses, because remember, that's what we do. We're not owning casino chips. We're owning bits of businesses. We're owning bits of NVIDIA and companies all across the planet. In order to get that incredible long-term return, you have to ride out the downs. You just have to ride them out. You can't know when they're coming, but if you want to capture the permanent ups, you have to ride out the temporary lows. Trying to get in and out, market timing, is almost impossible. There is no one out there who consistently can get out of the market and get back in again at the right time, right? Do we know any famous market timers? We don't, do we? Do we know any famous long-term, patient, disciplined investors? Yes. Yeah. We can name 10 of them now.
The challenge perhaps is that those who are more commonly on TV are those who are extolling their own skills, as opposed. So the loudest voices are obviously. Of course.
And what do people say on TV? They say something to sell. And by the way, there are 24 hours of news to fill. Can you fill 24 hours of news with? Sometimes the market goes up. Sometimes the market goes down. Mostly it goes up. Get in, stay in, and ignore the noise. You can't fill 24 hours with that. Yeah. So what do they fill it with? It's like, oh, the next crisis is this and this and this stock and that stock. And it's just noise. And it has always been noise, and it will always be noise. And as long-term patient investors, which we have to be, we have to just ignore it, right? If we look at our account balance every day, toss a coin. Some days you'll be happy, some days you'll be sad. If you look at your account statement once a year, probably 75% of the time you'll be happy, right? If you only look at it every 5 years, 95% of the time you'll be happy. If you look at it once every 10 years, pretty much 100% of the time you'll be happy. That's just the power of ignoring the noise.
You've used the word patient investors for a while. And I was going to ask you, and I almost rather made a Freudian slip by saying some of your patients, your clients. I should have said, because in a sense that your clients are psychologically patients of yours. You're trying to manage their human psyche to get them to do what's not necessarily in their psychological not interest, but what they're not prepared to do sometimes.
The thing that they want to do is most often the thing that you have to not do.
Yeah. So you have meetings with all your clients on periodic basis. What are some of the threats or the concerns? Do your clients sort of say, I'm worried about economic policy, I'm worried about politics, I'm worried about civil war, I'm worried about whatever it is, I'm worried about the UK budget, I'm worried about the Australian, but do people worry about that when they come to talk to you, or is that really not the topic of conversation?
It can be the topic of conversation, and when people are worried, there's one thing that I always show them, and it's the most powerful chart I think that ever exists, and I wish I could show it now, but we're on the radio so I can't. But it's a chart that shows all of the 20% or more, and as I said, a 20% or more fall in the market is what we call a bear market. Sort of academically a bear market. All of those falls that have happened since the end of the Second World War. Okay, what caused the fall? What the thing was that was going on at the time? How long that fall took? And then what the market stood at the peak and the trough. Okay, and what you see is in 1946, that was the first sort of crash post the Second World War, the S&P 500 stood at 19 and it fell to 13, okay? Then it promptly went up to, 30 before it fell down to whatever it fell down. Then it promptly went up again before it fell again. And what you see in this chart is, it must be about 30 crashes, all of which have been temporary in their nature, despite the fact that really awful things were going on at the time. Think back to the 1970s, okay? The world was a really dark place back then. Terrible things were happening.
I was born in those years.
There we go.
Oh,
Simon Caudry's decade of birth. Really bad things. And what you realise from this is that it's never different, because the four most dangerous words in investing, as we know, are this time it's different. Yeah. And when you look at this and you see the crashes and you understand that the market has gone down, but it's always turned around quite quickly and come back up again. And it's gone from 19 back in 1946 to almost 7,000 today, despite the fact that it has had many, many crashes along the way. You realise that you don't really have to worry at all, right? Because what has driven that market movement over that past, 70 odd years, is human spirit and human innovation. Because remember what we own again. We own bits of businesses. And the reason that the price of those businesses go up over time is because the profits of those businesses go up over time. Okay? Why does the market go up? Because profits go up. Why do profits go up? Well, because for better or worse, capitalism kind of functions better than all the alternatives.
Humans have a nature to want to improve, be more efficient, do different things.
Every day. Billions of humans wake up, right, with really only one thing, and that is that they want to
go back to sleep. Oh no, sorry.
They want to better their life, and they want to better the life of their children.
Yeah.
Right, and that shows up in the price of businesses, because it shows up in the price of profits. Because if you're a business and you're not increasing profits every year, and you're a listed entity, well, what happens to you as the CEO of that business? The board step in and replace you. Right? You're gone. They replace you with another CEO who is going to make sure that profits go up. And how do they do that? Well, they get rid of the factories that aren't making money. They close down certain markets. They come up with new products, new innovation. And lo and behold, profits turn around and go back up again. As a whole, right? Of course, we always have the individual businesses that go bust. But that's okay, because we own many businesses all across the planet. And so when you see that chart and you understand human spirit and human innovation and where that shows up, you can kind of sit back and say, it's okay. Like, the next crash will come. Something will cause it. We don't know what. But that human spirit will prevail, and company share prices will turn around and go back up again. And I want to benefit from that. So I'm going to keep holding on.
We are almost at the end of the year. And a lot of what you said is about being patient, about being long-term, and almost ignoring ignoring things. But yet humans also are sort of somewhat hardwired to say, I'll make a New Year's resolution, or I'll start again. That must frustrate you in a little bit, because people come to you, I'll do better next year. Doesn't that? How do you address that sort of psychological behaviour of, I'm going to be a different person in this year? Because what you're saying is you need to be a different person psychologically for the next 15 or 20 years. So how do you overcome that sort of calendarization of the human psyche?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, you can use the calendarization to your benefit, right? Can't you, in a way, and think, okay, it's good to reset time. Yeah, reset and sort of look back. And, the biggest mistake people really make, Simon, is not investing at all, isn't it? And if that's the mistake that you're making, because you keep saying, I'll get to it, or I'll wait until the dust has settled and it feels safe to invest. By the way, that day will never come. The dust will never settle and it will never feel safe to invest. But you have to just do it, and you have to start today. Then the beginning of the year is not a bad time to sort of say, okay, this is the year. Like, this is the year I'm going to really look at my future, and I'm going to say to myself, if I want to live a comfortable, independent, long retirement, the only real way I can do that is by investing. And this is the year that I'm going to start doing that. Then that's a good thing in a way.
It's a chance for a reset, a reevaluation of priorities, a reevaluation of objectives. Perhaps.
Yeah, and your future, kind of rethinking your future plan. What sort of life do you want to live? Because
maybe do it on the 2nd of January once the hangovers recover from the first.
Because the thing about investing you have to remember is we're not investing for investing's sake.
Yeah.
We're investing for a reason. And what is that reason? Why are we investing?
Isn't necessarily fun because of all the terror that goes with it.
Yeah, investing shouldn't be fun, right? If you're getting your entertainment from the stock market, you're doing it all wrong.
Although, worryingly, a lot of apps that encourage people to trade try and make it a fun experience, but that's a whole different
And it shouldn't
conversation.
be like it should be boring, because really you should just be, as I said, owning the global stock market and doing nothing much with it for the next how many decades.
We are out of time, but there's one little anecdote I want to end with. There was a very funny experience probably about a year ago when there was a market crash, and I think it was Robinhood, one of the brokers, went down on the day. The whole systems went down the day the market was crashing, and in hindsight, it was the best thing that could have happened for investors, because no one could sell at what was perceived to be the bottom. Everyone then had to benefit from the next day's recovery. Yep.
Really powerful.
Yeah.
Best thing to do is almost always nothing.
Yeah. Well, Georgie, with that, I regret to say we are out of time, but
That went
thank
fast.
you. It really did. It really did. Now, I'm hoping that we'll see you at some point in 2026, and we won't skip a whole year again without having you back on the show. So thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Simon.
My final note is just to remind our listeners that our show is available on YouTube for those who wish to watch it, and other shows that we've produced over the years. Just search for Money Sense Cayman and all our shows are there. With that, thank you once again to all our listeners, and please do tune into Money Sense once again in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you very much there, Mr. Caudry, for Money Sense. It's now 8:01.